Welcome, everyone. I'm Kimberly Boschman, and this is the Intentionally Intuitive podcast. In this episode, we're going to take a look at life path number 7 and the possible influences of each zodiac sign. So I recommend listening to your sun, moon, and rising signs to gain a greater understanding and a bigger perspective of what you could be working with in this lifetime. Timestamps are provided below, as well as calculations for your life path number if you aren't sure what yours is. So let's go ahead and get started. Aries, if you are an Aries sun, moon, or rising, and you are also a life path number 7, then this reading is for you. We're going to look at the higher and the lower expressions of both Aries and the 7 to see how these energies work together and how they could potentially work against each other so you know what you'll be facing or could be facing. So Aries is a fire sign. When we see Aries in its highest expression, we see this energy that's very passionate, motivated, confident, with relentless determination. Aries can be very direct in their approach as well. They're also very, as I mentioned, passionate. And so if they have an idea or a goal that they want to accomplish, they are going to go after that goal with so much fire and passion until they reach that goal. So when we see them in their lower expression, we see this energy of a lack of patience, mood alteration, quick to anger, impulsivity, aggressiveness, and martyrdom. So keep that in mind as we move through the energies of the 7. Now, 7 energy is much more introverted. It's considered an introverted energy. Aries, I would believe, feels more extroverted, right? It's that fire, it's that passion, it's that determination. And so already off the bat, we kind of have a little bit of push-pull, right? Not in a bad way, because the Aries will push the 7 to not become a hermit, that sort of thing. We'll talk about that. So it's good, but you might feel a little bit of a push-pull as well. 7 energy is often associated with more Piscean energy, as well as the full moon energy. It's considered a water element. And so we have the fire element of Aries and the water element of the 7. In its positive traits, the 7 will show or will be, intelligent, sensitive, intuitive, and psychic, studious. They are good at details. They can be very meticulous. They're great researchers. They like to often be alone. Or in solitude. 7s are typically, depending on what else obviously is in their chart, they're okay with being that independent person, who's doing their own thing. They just have a lot going on within. And they are the truth seekers. So they're the ones that, you can tell them something, but they want to see it for themselves. They want to experience it. They want to learn about it. They want to fully understand all of the dynamics of whatever it is, okay? And so we often call 7s the bridge between the metaphysical and the physical, because again, they're the psychics, they're intuitive, they are very in tune with their inner self, but they're also very physical and logical. And again, those truth seekers, they want to, for them, it's like seeing is believing, which can be challenging when they're tapping into that more intuitive psychic side. So when we look at the 7s in their lower expression, we have this energy of liking their own opinion, very opinionated, sort of to an extreme. They can be cold, sarcastic, very reserved. They can be self-righteous. They can take offense at the smallest things, especially when no offense was intended, right? There was no intention behind whatever occurred, whatever was said, but they can take offense to that rather easily. They can be kind of overly sensitive to that energy. They also are the perfectionist, and they can sometimes be too practical or too logical. And that's what I was talking about when I said 7s are meant to be the bridge between the physical and the metaphysical. They're really supposed to be very well, when they're in their higher expression, they are very well balanced between the ethereal and the physical plane. And they're sort of bringing those ethereal ideas down into the physical plane and working with that energy. So when they're too practical or too logical or too sort of grounded or too within their emotions or whatever the case may be, they sort of burn that bridge, right? So let's look at the negative traits of the 7 and the negative traits of Aries. So again, Aries, we have lack of patience, the mood alteration, quick to anger, impulsive, aggressive, and sort of this martyrdom energy, which is like, I'm going to save the world. I'm going to do it for everybody. I'm going to do all the things for all of the people because they're not capable of doing it for themselves type thing. And so it's sort of disempowering energy. And then we couple that with the energy of the 7, which is like opinionated, sarcastic, cold, reserved, sort of self-righteous, quick to take offense, and that sort of overly practical perfectionist energy. So you have this aggressive, impatient energy of the Aries, and then you have all those lower traits of the 7, which is very just screams like heavily into their own ego, and the ego is in control, as opposed to giving the ego a better job to do and putting it kind of in its place and moving from a higher elevation. And so you can see how the fire energy of the Aries and the water energy of the 7 kind of go into this like battle energy. It's like you're kind of like just sort of working, those energies start working against each other. So the water tries to put out the fire tries to evaporate the water, and it just becomes like this sort of clash of the titans within you, right? And so it can just sort of feel like very like this churning energy that's very difficult for 7s to express, because again, they can sort of be more withdrawn. They can fall into sort of like a hermit phase where they just don't want to, deal with anyone or work with anyone or whatever the case may be. Again, it's a very introverted energy. Then when you have that sort of aggressiveness and lack of patience of Aries coming in, I'm not sure a lot of people would want to work with that energy either, So it becomes like this, this storm within. Now, with that said, the lower energies are never a bad thing, right? They are a part of who we are. They are meant to be experienced. We chose these energies for a reason. And so if you have Aries and you're a 7 and you're in your lower expression, it can be very challenging. Okay, that's very challenging energy to work with. However, there's something that energy is trying to show you, or multiple things that energy is trying to show you. And so it's up to you to figure out what that is, how to work with it, how to sort of put it in its place and, make it so that it's not in control, basically, so that it can help to elevate you into your higher expressions. So again, not a bad thing. You're going to deal with your lower expressions all throughout your life. You just need to, see how it feels when you're in your lower expressions. What are the challenges that surface when you're in those lower expressions? And how can you work with those energies to assist you in elevating you higher? Now, when we look at those energies, the positive of the 7 and Aries, it's actually a really beautiful energy. It's very complementary. It's almost like they sort of need each other to be productive, to create their space in the world, or claim their space in the world, right? And so 7, again, we have this very intelligent energy who's also very intuitive and psychic and really within, right? Like really working with, again, those more mystical, ethereal energies, as well as the practical. They're the ones, again, great researchers. You get that Aries energy behind that 7, and again, that extroverted energy, that is going to push that 7 out into the world. That is going to create that passion and that motivation and that confidence, because all signs can struggle with confidence. But if you have that Aries and that 7, again, it just brings you sort of out of your shell a little bit and gives you the confidence to do whatever it is that your soul sort of signed up to do. Also, Aries is more of like a social energy, and again, 7 is more introverted. So again, there's a little bit of push-pull there, but on the flip side of that, you have Aries whose energy is pushing the 7 to step out, to make those big bold decisions, to investigate those big bold truths, whatever the case may be. It just kind of gives them the oomph and the confidence that they need. And so again, if you have Aries and 7 energy, I would see you as sort of out in the world, again, a researcher, researching things to make the world a better place, using your intuitive insight and your passion to drive you, whatever the case may be, maybe being some kind of a teacher. But that Aries energy, again, is giving you the confidence that you need to not fall into other people's belief systems without doing the research, right? It's like 7s are not usually very easily influenced. And the Aries energy can assist them in making sure that they don't fall into that sort of that trap of being, like I said, like overly influenced or controlled by other people's beliefs or whatever the case may be. So higher expression, very complementary. It definitely, the Aries energy brings the 7 out of its shell. It keeps it from falling into like severe hermit mode where, it feels like it doesn't need anyone, whatever. And, maybe whatever the work is it's doing, whatever the work is that 7 energy is asking you to do, maybe it is more independent work, and that's fine, but that Aries energy is giving you the confidence and the push and the fire to step out and to do whatever that is, right? To travel, to explore, to find that truth, whatever that truth is for you. So again, very complementary energy in its higher expression. So I hope that this was helpful. Thank you so much for listening. Take care. Taurus, if you are a Taurus sun, moon, or rising, and you are also life path number 7, then this reading is for you. We're going to look at the higher and the lower expressions of both Taurus energy and the 7 energy to see how these energies work together and how they may work against one another, so you kind of know what you could be facing throughout your journey. So Taurus energy is, of course, an earth energy. When we see Taurus in its highest expression, we see the strong desire for social and corporate stability, for extravagance, and for the finer things in life. Taurus energy, they are not afraid to work for what they desire and work hard for it and create whatever that is, right? It's like they want the newest car, the newest house, whatever. They're going to work for that. They're going to dedicate themselves to it, and they're more than likely going to achieve it. There's also this level of contentment with Taurus that they're perfectly fine with. They like their security. They're very dependable energy. They're dedicated in life and love. Now, when we look at the lower expressions of Taurus, we see stubbornness, not willing to take risks or to leave their comfort zone. So they kind of stay, again, where they're comfortable, which can be restrictive, of course, and confining. They become very predictable and rigid within their beliefs and their actions. And so they become sort of very set in their ways. And they can also carry this sort of perfectionist energy around. Now, which of course can, halt their progress. Now, 7 energy is also sort of like this more introverted energy. I sort of see Taurus as probably a good mixture of both extroverted and introverted, but it's definitely got some introverted themes, right? 7 energy is very introverted energy. It's more along the lines of the astrological connection of Pisces, or even the full moon, okay? Now, 7 is considered a water element. So we have water element of 7, and then we have the earth element of Taurus. So they work pretty well together. When we look at the positive traits of 7, we see they're very intelligent, they're very sensitive, they are often very intuitive and psychic. However, they don't usually step into those sort of intuitive psychic traits until a little bit later in life, because they start off sort of more practical. Most, now that's not everybody, but 7s in general is a very practical energy. You would almost think it would be like an earth energy because it's got a lot of similarities to Taurus, but it's very, very intuitive and psychic. 7s are meant to be the bridge between the ethereal and the physical plane. So getting those, having their head in the mysticism and their hands in the dirt, right? Like figuring things out as they take those ideas from the ethereal and create whatever it is, or find the truth within the physical, right? They're very studious in nature. They can be good at details, very meticulous. They're great at researching. So that's what I mean. They're very like that. That's the practical side of things. They are the truth seekers. They want to know what they want to know that what they're being told or what they're being asked to do, there's some truth behind it, right? So they're going to seek that out. They also sort of like to be alone and can be okay with solitude. Again, depending on what else is in their chart, but a lot of sevens are okay with sort of living alone, being alone, having relationships. But again, they're more that person who's got their head in the book, or, they're, again, very psychic or intuitive. And so they're just always kind of within themselves in a sense. Now, some of the negative traits of the 7 can be that they are very opinionated. They can be cold, sarcastic, very reserved, overly withdrawn. They can be self-righteous. They can take offense at, like easily offended. Let's put it that way. They will often be the perfectionists as well, and they can be too practical or logical. So that's what I mean. Like when they're in their lower shadow, they can be so practical and logical that they sort of discount anything that's intuitive or psychic, right? That they're going to not even entertain anything in the ethereal realm because there's no proof of it, right? They can't prove it. So again, very practical and logical when they're in their lower selves, which of course hinders them from truly stepping into their 7 energy because they're meant to be that bridge. So when we look at the lower energies of Taurus as well as the 7, we can see how the 7 becomes incredibly grounded and incredibly withdrawn, right? So we have those lower expressions of Taurus, again, which is very stubborn, likes to stay in their comfort zone, predictable, rigid, very set in their ways. And so just not a lot of movement there. They set up so many roots that they just become stuck. And then you couple that again with the lower 7 energy, which is like easily to take offense at things and looks for reasons to be in solitude, right? Like difficulties with relationships because of the way that they, are overly offended or, again, very opinionated, cold, sarcastic, reserved, but ultimately that overly practical and overly logical energy is what really handicaps them, because especially when it's coupled with that Taurus energy, because again, they become so incredibly grounded that it's just very dense energy. And so they've sort of become disconnected from the other complete half of themselves, which is that more mystical, ethereal side of themselves, right? The more like head in the clouds energy. They just become completely grounded. So it's a very halting energy. So that can be very, very challenging. And, at first it might feel very, very comfortable to sort of be in that energy for the Taurus 7. But eventually you're going to start to feel restless. You're going to feel like there's a big piece of you missing. And, it's up to you to figure out what that is and how to overcome those energies. So with that being said, the lower energies are not a bad thing. They are a part of who we are, and they're going to continue to be a part of who we are. We'll continue to fall into those lower expressions throughout our lifetime. We just need to figure out how to work with them, how to manage them, how to use them to our advantage to elevate us into our higher expressions. When we're in our lower expressions, that's when we're going to see the most challenges. That's where we're going to see things. We're going to hit walls. We're going to hit, obstacles that are going to try to show us which lower expression we're in and what we need to do to move beyond it and transmute that energy into something more manageable and that we can work with. And again, that will elevate us. So again, not a bad thing. You're not meant to alleviate those completely, exterminate those negative traits. You're just meant to learn to work with them and to see what they're trying to show you. So Taurus and 7 in their higher expressions are actually, again, very complementary, because Taurus, again, has that sort of strong desire for that social and corporate stability. But they also, again, they like those finer things in life, so they will, strive to get those. The 7, again, being the truth seeker, will use that sort of more earth energy to fuel and drive it and give it the sort of the steam that it needs to continue to move forward, right? And I believe that Taurus energy will also assist in getting that seven out into the world type thing and to open up a little bit more. And so again, because the seven is more introverted and has a tendency to be more withdrawn, that Taurus energy, again, Taurus also likes not only the, finer things in life, but they like that security and dependability of like family and of social networks and that sort of thing. So that assists the seven in sort of getting out into the world and meeting people or, building those networks, whatever the case may be. And so that actually assists the seven energy. But both are very, they're very like studious and practical and meticulous, good at the details, that sort of thing. So Taurus energy just sort of complements that for the seven. I could definitely see a Taurus seven being, again, like a teacher or a philosopher or a researcher, scientist, whatever the case may be. Someone who's definitely drawn to the practical, finding the truth of things. And then you have that beautiful seven mystical side of things to balance things out. So anyway, I hope that this was helpful in sort of showing you the higher and the lower expressions and how you can kind of work with those energies to complement one another when they're in their higher expressions, but also, when you start to feel just really dense or a little too grounded, that you may be in your lower expressions of both Taurus and your seven. And like I said, that can feel eventually like sitting in cement, right? It's just very, very grounding. So anyway, I hope that was helpful. Thank you so much for listening. Take care. Gemini, if you are a Gemini sun, moon, or rising sign, and you are also a life path number 7, then this reading is for you. We're going to look at the higher and the lower expressions of Gemini and the 7 to see how these energies complement one another, how well they work together, as well as how some of the challenges that could come up for the lower expressions. So we're going to take a look at the higher and the lower expressions of both Gemini and the 7, and again, to see how they sort of play into each other. Okay, Gemini is, of course, an air sign. When Gemini is in its highest expression, we see a very adaptable energy, easygoing, intelligent, outgoing, social, perceptive, analytical, inquisitive. They always are interested in what's going on, what's happening, what's the latest thing, they want to learn, right? They're always very inquisitive about things that come up. They don't necessarily take things at face value. They're highly passionate as well, especially things that they are very feel drawn to or that resonate for them. When Gemini is in its lower expression, we see indecisiveness, impulsivity, unreliability, difficulty in planning things, a tendency to be inconsistent. So when we look at the 7 energy is more introverted. It's a very introverted energy. Gemini feels much more extroverted. But for 7, it's very introverted. So already you kind of got a little bit of push-pull, but you also have that complementary energy of Gemini helping the 7 to get out of its shell, right? And to get out and mingle a little bit. Because 7s are very, 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 very introverted energy. When we look at the astrological connection for 7, it's more along the lines of like Piscean energy or even the full moon energy. It's a water element. So we have the air element of Gemini and that water element of the 7. When we look at the positive traits of 7, we see that they also are very intelligent, sensitive, incredibly intuitive, and often psychic. They're very studious, much like Gemini. They like to, they often have their head in the book. They're often, maybe like the person who goes to school and just studies, or even like, unconventional studies, right? Or mystical studies, whatever the case may be, but they're very studious. They want to know, right? What's going on, how things work. So a very studious energy, very similar to Gemini. 7s are good at details. They can be very meticulous. They're wonderful researchers. Again, they want to know like the ins and outs of things, how things work, how, why. They want to know the why, right? So if you tell them something, they're going to want to understand how it works and how you came to that conclusion. They are ultimately the truth seekers. They don't necessarily take things at face value or simply because someone told them it's so. They're the ones that are going to be doing the research to understand the finer details of whatever it is, right? The intricacies. Sevens also often like to be alone. They're very good in their own solitude, right? So it can sometimes be a lower trait if they become too introverted, because obviously that can become unhealthy after a while. But they are the ones who they're okay with being alone because they have so much going on within, right? Like they're meant to be the bridge between the ethereal and the physical plane. And so they're constantly, in their head, in their heart, trying to figure things out, getting to know the deeper aspects of themselves, as well as the deeper aspects of the world. And so again, they are one of the signs that are very okay with just being alone or being in their solitude. Now, when we look at the lower aspects of the seven, we see, again, very opinionated, cold, sarcastic, reserved, self-righteous, easily offended. They will often be the perfectionist, and they can sometimes be too practical and too logical. And so they end up sort of discounting any of the more mystical side of themselves, which is really like half of themselves, right? Like, so much of the seven is practical, truth seekers, logical, but then the other half is quite very much so the ethereal, right? That intuitive side, that psychic side. And I would say that's probably the case for most people, but in sevens, that's just such a part of their core. They're meant to be that bridge between the ethereal and the physical. And in order to do that, they have to understand both sides of themselves. And so if they become too practical or logical, then they sort of get stuck in that physical plane, right? And they don't explore that whole other side of themselves. So when we look at the lower expressions of Gemini and the seven together, we see how like the indecisiveness, the impulsivity, the unreliability of Gemini sort of creates some chaos for the seven, right? Who's very, again, in its lower expression, very practical, sort of opinionated, sarcastic, self-righteous, right? Or easily offended. And it just kind of becomes like this sort of push-pull energy, because the Gemini air energy becomes like this feeling of like scatteredness, like the seven can't get their focus, right? Like things just become very scattered for them, and their energy becomes scattered. But again, it's a part of who they are, the Gemini energy. And if they're in their lower expression, then it's kind of like they just become, like I said, their energy just becomes so scattered that they can't step into that higher elevation of seven, being that person who's going to, be the researcher, be the truth seeker, be good at details and be very meticulous and that sort of thing. And again, it just sort of feels like this push-pull between this energy of the seven that, feels very sort of grounded. Because again, when seven's in its lower expression, it's actually very grounded, almost too grounded. And then you have like that scatteredness of the Gemini air energy, lower expression. And so again, it's just like this, like the storm, like this, just like two sides of one kind of fighting against each other. And so it can be very challenging energy for the seven to work with. Like they might be like, why can't I make a plan here? Why can't I stay focused on whatever this is? But they're sort of in their lower energy of Gemini, and so it's just scattering their energy. Anyway, it becomes like this very chaotic sort of energy, which can be challenging for the seven to deal with. So with that said, I will mention that the lower expressions are not bad. There's something, they're a part of who we are, and we're meant to work with that energy. We're meant to experience it, see how it feels, understand, what it's trying to show us, so that we can manage it in a way that it actually assists us in elevating to a higher octave. So it's not a bad thing. You're not meant to alleviate it completely, right? Get rid of it. You're meant to be aware of it when you're in your lower expression and figure out, what you need to do to move beyond it, to manage it, to sort of find your moderation and mitigate that energy. Because you will fall in and out of your negative traits throughout your lifetime. And usually when we do that is when we face our greatest challenges. Those challenges are trying to show us what we need to learn, where it is that we maybe are in a lower expression and why we feel stuck or chaotic, or like we're not ourselves or whatever the case may be. And if we can pause long enough to look at that challenge, it will often highlight for us where it is that we need some adjustment, where it is that the wisdom is just waiting to be pulled out of it, so that again, we can manage that energy and move into a higher octave. Now, when we look at the higher expressions of Gemini and the 7, you can easily see how Gemini energy, again, kind of calms the 7 energy of, again, that sort of more practical energy of like needing to know all of the ins and outs and, just like needing to research everything. And it also, because again, it's very that very adaptable, easygoing energy. And so it just kind of calms the energy of the 7 a little bit, but it also is a very intelligent energy. And so that sort of coupled with the 7's intelligence, just sort of skyrockets the possibility of like, again, being sort of the expert in your field, being the person that people are really come to because you are the one who's going to put in the work and you're going to know your stuff, right? Like it's just Gemini energy really assists the 7 and complements the 7 in those traits coming out, right? That intelligence, that more studious nature, the need to kind of research and know the ins and outs. That is so Gemini jam, right? That's like something they really like to do. They're very analytical and inquisitive. So again, it just feeds into one another. And again, that Gemini energy, being so outgoing and social, again, is sort of pushing that 7 outside of itself, right? Like letting it or giving it the courage to kind of, and the drive to get out more, express themselves, create networks. Those networks will assist the 7 in whatever it is that they're trying to do. So I would say, like, if you have Gemini, if you chose to have Gemini sun, moon, or rising, and you're a 7, you're probably meant to be doing something in the, out in the public in some way that will assist the public in some way. You can still honor your more introverted energies of the 7, but that Gemini energy is going to sort of create this drive within you that's going to want to have a social circle or have a network or join a group of people, of researchers or whatever the case may be, to collaborate with. I could definitely see Gemini energy and 7 energy coming together to push you to collaborate with other people, especially if it has to do with truth seeking or research or something like that, or something studious or science or even spiritual or mystical in some way. So again, very, very complementary energy that, it's like 7 can be so sort of deep, right? It's like very like Piscean, it's very within itself, right? It's a lot of energy going on within. And then we have the Gemini energy, which is air energy, and it's more about the mind, right? Like understanding and just researching and knowledge and logic and the analytical and inquisitivity, or whatever the word is, inquisitive. So anyway, higher expressions of Gemini and 7 work beautifully together. They work really, really well. The lower expressions is where it's going to feel like just a chaotic storm that is really challenging to work with. You can definitely do it, and it's through those challenges that you will learn the most about yourself, and what you're capable of, and what you're meant to do with those energies, right? And then when you're in your higher expression, it's going to feel good. It's going to feel like you're in purpose, like you're doing what you came here to do. And that Gemini energy will assist you as a life path 7 in accomplishing whatever that is. So overall, very beautiful energy to work with. Definitely brings that 7 out of its shell. So I hope this was helpful. Thank you so much for listening. Take care. Cancer, if you are a Cancer sun, moon, or rising, and you are also a life path number 7, then this reading is for you. We're going to look at the higher and the lower expressions of both Cancer and the 7, so you can see how these energies work together, how they might work against each other, so you understand what you're working with. Okay, so Cancer is a water sign. When Cancer is in its highest expression, we see this very nurturing, sensitive, compassionate, security-seeking. They like to sort of have a home life, have a safety within their home. They often will seek deep, intimate connections. They're very loyal and protective, very intuitive and psychic. So keep that in mind. Lower expression of Cancer, we see very withdrawn, overly emotional, moody, over sentimental. They can be vindictive. They can be lacking emotional maturity as well. Now, when we look at the 7 is also a very introverted energy. When we look at the astrological connection of 7, we see that it's more Piscean in nature, and it's also associated with the full moon. 7 is considered a water element. And so just like Cancer, a water sign, we have a lot of water in the mix now, a lot of emotion, a lot of emotive energy, a lot going on within, okay? 7's positive traits, we see that they're very intelligent, they are very sensitive, they are also incredibly intuitive and psychic. 7s are meant to be the bridge between the psychic realm, the mystical, the ethereal, and the physical plane. Okay, when they're in their higher expression, they are very well balanced between the two. They're very in tune with their psychic energies or intuitive side, and they're also very logical and practical. So it becomes this really beautiful balance. 7s are very often very studious. They're the good researchers. They are the truth seekers. They will not take things at face value. They have to understand how they work, right? It's kind of like if you give a 7 a watch, right? They're the ones that would be more likely to take the watch apart and then try to put it back together to figure out and understand how it works, like how it all comes together and works together. So they're the truth seekers. They're not going to just take something that someone says and just blindly believe it. They're going to need to understand the intricacies of it. 7s are okay with being alone. I say 7s. Now, of course, it depends on what's in the rest of your chart, right? But 7s in general is a more okay with solitude and being on their own than some of the other signs. And so that can sometimes be an issue because they can become overly withdrawn and sort of go into hermit mode, and where they just become sort of a recluse. And then they're not sharing any of their gifts with the world. And really with all of that mysticism and all of that practicality, they are meant to be, their work is meant to be seen in some way, right? Or have an effect in some way. And so if they become too withdrawn, that becomes an issue. They're also very detailed and meticulous. And so very sort of aligned in very complementary ways with the Cancer energy. And we'll come back to the positive traits in just a moment and kind of compare the two. But when we look at the negative traits of the 7, we see that they become very opinionated. They become cold, closed off, sarcastic, overly reserved, self-righteous. They take offense at the smallest thing, right? They become offended easily. They tend to be the perfectionist, and they can become too practical and logical to where they just completely shut off that other side of themselves. Because again, that mystical side, that intuitiveness, and that psychic energy is meant to be really strong and profound within a 7, because again, they're meant to be that bridge. And so if they completely shut the door on that other side of themselves, they're only getting, like half of an understanding of who they are. And again, they can become overly withdrawn to where they just shut themselves, lock themselves away from the rest of the world and, live in their own little world. So when we look at the lower expressions of Cancer, we can see how that coupled with the lower expressions of 7 would just sort of really push that 7 into solitude and to being completely withdrawn, and or being so completely have tunnel vision to where only their ideas are the ones that are going to work. Only their opinions are the right opinions. Only their truth is the real truth. You know what I mean? So it becomes very isolating, because again, we have that lower expression of Cancer of being withdrawn, overly emotional, moody, vindictive, and lacking emotional maturity. So again, that 7 being opinionated, sarcastic, cold. You can see how it kind of, the Cancer energy feeds into the 7 energy to sort of make the 7 this person that's going to be very challenging to work with, right? Or and challenging to be as well, because you're going to be so withdrawn and sort of consumed by your own emotions and your own ideas and belief systems, that you're closing yourself off to the rest of the world. And some people may be like, oh, there's nothing wrong with that. There isn't, to some degree, right? Like there's nothing wrong with being in solitude or living off grid or whatever the case may be. But you also came here to experience life, right? To experience, relationships with other people. You didn't come here to live on an island. And so, and stay on that island and never interact with others. And again, no judgment if that's if you know somebody that's doing that and it's working, great. I'm just saying the lower expressions of Cancer and 7 can really push that person to just become so withdrawn and so rigid in their beliefs and their thoughts that it just becomes very isolating. But I will also say that the lower expressions are not a bad thing, right? Like those are a part of who we are. We came here to experience those as well, and we will continue to experience them throughout our lifetime. They will show up in different ways at different times. When they do show up and when we sort of find ourselves immersed within them, that's when we face a lot of our challenges, right? And so those challenges are meant to show us what it is we need to learn so that we can elevate ourselves into our higher octave, right? And then it just becomes this process of every time you dip into those negative traits, you try to figure out what it is it's trying to show you, what you're supposed to learn. And then as you go through that process, you're able to move yourself into the higher octave much more quickly. But again, those negative traits serve a purpose, right? So it's not all bad. It's not bad at all. It can be very challenging. It could be very, very challenging. If the 7 is in their lower expression and they're also Cancer in their lower expression, that's going to be a really challenging energy, because again, it's going to feel very, very isolating. It's going to feel like you have no one you can turn to, that the world is against you, that, again, it's going to feel very restrictive as well. And so that can be really challenging for a 7, because again, you're so naturally inquisitive, naturally, wanting to know how things work, even how people work, right? Like 7s would make great like psychoanalysts to figure out what's going on, in the depths of somebody else's soul, right? And so, and especially with like Cancer and 7 energy, I could definitely see somebody with a lot of Cancerian energy and 7 energy being a psychic professionally, being, a reader or something like that, or a healer, or, or working with like numerology, where there's that practical layer, but also that mystical side, right? So anyway, it's very complementary, beautiful energy, but when we're in those lower expressions, it can be very challenging and feel very isolating. When we move into those higher expressions, we'll take a look at those real quick. We can see how, again, though both being that sort of water energy and real emotive energy, they really feed into each other. It's like they come together to create an ocean of resources when it comes to that compassion, that sensitivity, that the sort of like, again, seeking those intimate connections, the psychic and intuitive energy, the loyalty, that protective energy. I will say that if you have a lot of Cancer energy and you're also a 7, you may be like sort of on the flip side, where a lot of sevens usually tend to fall into the extreme of being too practical, too logical, that sort of thing. You may actually fall on the other spectrum, where you are sort of so mystical, so into the ethereal, that you're sort of losing sight of the practical side of yourself, right? The more physical side of yourself. And that can be an issue as well, right? Because an extreme of anything becomes toxic in some way. So for you all, this is going to be, I think that 7 energy balances that out, right? Because again, it's got that very strong practical energy as well. But just keep in mind, if you're Cancer and a 7, and even when you're in your higher expression, you're going to have to kind of work to keep yourself grounded, right? Like to keep that sort of logical side of yourself and that practical side, because it's part of the whole. And you, again, are meant to be the bridge between the mystical and the ethereal and the physical plane, right? And so, so key is to not lose sight of any side of yourself. But overall, the Cancerian energy and the 7 energy just works really, really well together for that 7 really stepping into the more mystical side of themselves, that highly sensitive side, that more emotive side. And again, I can just see you working along something to do with like, whether you're like a therapist or a psychoanalyst or something like that, or a reader, right? But overall, very beautiful energy. It's just when you fall into those lower expressions where you're going to see those challenges come up for you, and that's the case with any sign. So it's just a matter of working with it. So anyway, I hope that this has been helpful in kind of highlighting the higher and the lower expressions, so you can kind of understand what you're working with when they showcase, when they show up. And yeah, beautiful energy overall. So take care, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. Bye for now. Leo, if you are a Leo sun, moon, or rising sign, and you're also a life path number 7, then this reading is for you. We're going to take a look at the higher and the lower expressions of both Leo and the 7, so we can see how these energies work together, how they might work against each other, so that you know what you kind of signed up for in this lifetime. So Leo is a fire sign. When we look at the higher expressions of Leo, we see natural born leadership, drive, compassion, a big heart, generous with their time, energy, and money. They can also be very self-assured, not self-absorbed, self-assured, and confident, which is a healthy attribute to have, right? And so very strong energy, Leo, right? Like likes to be seen, likes to be experienced, likes to sort of be in the spotlight a little bit, and is very confident in that energy and in that space when that's in its highest expression. Now, lower expression of Leo, we see some very strong energy, but on the other polarity. We see egotistical, stubborn, arrogant, dominating, possessive, jealous, pompous, and very self-absorbed, right? So it's very like a much more aggressive lower energy. Now, when we look at the 7 energy, 7 is a very introverted, softer energy, okay? So the astrological connection for 7 would be similar to like Pisces or even the full moon. It is a water element. So we have this fire element of Leo, this very strong energy of Leo, and then sort of this softer energy of this 7, which is again water. Now, when we look at the positive traits of 7, we see they're very intelligent, they are sensitive, incredibly intuitive, and psychic. They're very studious, they're good researchers, they are the truth seekers. They are the ones who want to know how things work. They're not going to take things at face value. Just because you tell them something is so, they're not going to necessarily, that's not going to be enough for them. They need to understand how it works, why it's that way. And so again, they are the researchers. They are the truth seekers. They would make incredibly good scientists because again, they need to know how things work. They also are okay with being alone. They are the ones who would sort of flourish in solitude. They just because there's so much kind of going on within, right? Sevens are meant to be that bridge between the ethereal plane and the physical plane. And so there's a lot going on mentally, emotionally, spiritually. So they are okay with, again, that solitude. They almost need the solitude to be able to function at their highest, right? Not maybe all the time. They don't want to go into hermit mode, but they do need a level of solitude. They are also detailed and meticulous, which really assists in that more practical energy of like being a researcher, being a scientist, understanding how things work, right? And then taking all that knowledge and putting it to use in some way. When we look at the negative traits of 7, we see sort of like this more aggressive energy. We see, very opinionated, cold and sarcastic, reserved and withdrawn. They can be offended very easily. They tend to be self-righteous. They are the perfectionists, and they become a little bit too practical and logical. And so they would very quickly discount that other side of themselves, the mystical side of themselves, and sort of shut that side off. And then they're functioning straight from the more practical, physical side. And again, they've cut off a complete side of themselves. So again, that's more of the lower expression. Now, when we couple that 7 lower expression with the lower expression of Leo, which is that very strong, aggressive, egoic energy, stubborn, we just get this really sort of, again, aggressive is the word that keeps coming up, right? Like easily offended, very opinionated, in your face, trying to control a situation as opposed to being open to and understanding the situation. They definitely would be the type of person who would be, if they're in their lower expressions, there is their way or the highway type thing. And, everybody who doesn't believe what they believe are wrong, right? And so it could be a very sort of suffocating energy to work with because it's so aggressive and so, just sort of opinionated, right? Like self-righteous. It becomes this really self-righteous, aggressive energy. And so again, you can see how that would keep you stuck because 7s, again, are meant to sort of be open to not only like opinions and ideas and opportunities within the physical, but also within the spiritual realm, right? In the ethereal. And so if they become very self-righteous or they're too opinionated or they're too stubborn and arrogant and dominating and all those things, then they close themselves off to all of the wisdom, all of the knowledge that's circulating around because they become like tunnel vision. They've got tunnel vision at that point. So again, you can sort of see how this would affect relationships, this would affect their work, this would affect a lot of things, and it can become very isolating. And it can become like a storm energy to work with, right? Like aggressively chaotic, I guess, right? So anyway, the lower expressions could be very challenging to move through. There's nothing wrong with the lower expressions. Those are what, teach us what we need to know about ourselves. They help us to figure out the tools we need to elevate ourselves into our higher octave. When we're in our lower expressions, that's where we're going to face most of our challenges. That's where we're going to face those really difficult experiences in life that are trying to show us something, that are trying to teach us something, to assist us in moving through those lower expressions and transmuting them into something more elevated. Right? So there's nothing wrong with them. They're a part of who you are and you're going to experience them throughout your life. But it helps to understand sort of what they are. So when you're in it, you can be aware of it and then start to work towards ways to transmute that energy and work with it, manage it. Now, when you're in your higher expressions of Leo and the 7, it actually becomes really powerful energy. Leo, again, is that natural born leader. They have that drive, that confidence about them, right? And so if you are a 7 and you are, say, a scientist or a researcher or, let's go with like a researcher, right? And you is going to give you, that Leo energy is going to give you the confidence to do the work. It's going to push you into the more public sphere. It's going to pull you out of your shell. You're going to feel sort of compelled to come out of your shell. You're probably not one of those sevens who, would live necessarily off grid and alone and be okay with it long term, because you have the Leo energy. And the Leo energy is like pushing you to experience things, because through those experiences you will learn things. And you can't do that if you're stuck somewhere, like withdrawn in the middle of nowhere, right? You can use that as your base, but that Leo energy is going to be pushing you to get out there, to explore, to figure out what's going on in the world, and to use that, like that desire to find the truth, to research, that studious energy, to do something in, again, a bigger forum, right? Which, again, if you're too overly withdrawn or too rigid or stuck in your ways, that sort of thing, it's not, you're going to feel very stuck. You're going to start getting restless, especially with that Leo energy. Because you won't stay in your lower expressions forever, right? Eventually it gets so challenging that you find a way out of it. And when you get into those higher expressions and that fire ignites in Leo, and then you've got that 7 energy of like wanting to know what's going on and wanting to learn and all of those things, as well as like the more mystical side of things, right? It could push you to really explore those mystical side of things. Either way, the Leo energy is the force that's going to really pull you out of your shell and sort of push you outside of your comfort zone, right? But again, your soul obviously signed up for Leo energy and 7 energy for a very specific reason, which might not be shown to you until later on, but it's good to know that there is a method to the madness. But it's really powerful energy to work with. And again, it will assist you in not getting too withdrawn, right? The Leo energy will assist you in, getting out there, exploring, find what you're passionate about, and then go all in and find your truth. So powerful energies, definitely intense in the lower expression. But again, nothing you can't work with. So I hope that this was helpful in kind of highlighting those energies for you as you continue to move through your journey. So thank you so much for listening. Take care, everyone. Virgo, if you are a Virgo sun, moon, or rising, and you are also a life path number 7, then this reading is for you. We're going to take a look at the higher and the lower expressions of both Virgo and the 7 to see how these energies work together, how they can potentially work against each other, and what may come up for you as you continue along your journey. So Virgo is an earth sign. Virgo in its highest expression, we see a very humble energy. We see a practical person who's industrious, kind, empathetic, methodical, and a quick thinker. They're also very hardworking and responsible, and Virgos have the biggest hearts. I know a lot of Virgos, and every Virgo I know just has such a big heart. They're so caring and so generous. Now, when we get into our lower expression of Virgo, we see overly critical of self and others. They become the perfectionists. They become overly systematic and rigid within their thinking and their actions. They can also become very pessimistic and stubborn, as well as overly meticulous. So when we look at the 7 energies, we see this more introverted energy. I would also say that Virgo is sort of a more introverted energy as well, but 7 is definitely an introverted energy. When we look at the astrological connection between 7s, we see more Piscean energy as well as full moon energy, and 7 is considered a water element. So when we look at the positive traits of 7, we see, again, intelligence, sensitivity. They're very intuitive and psychic. They are meant to be the bridge between the ethereal and the physical plane. And so they are very much, a big part of them is that intuitive psychic energy, right? That more mystical side of things. And then another big side of them, the other half of them, is the more practical, grounded, physical energy. So again, they're meant to sort of bridge that gap and work with both sides of themselves. So we see very sensitive energy, very intuitive psychic. They're also, again, very studious. They're they make great researchers. They are the truth seekers. In the physical plane, they want to know that what they're being told is the truth, that what they're being asked to do has, is relevant, if you give them a clock, they are the ones that would take that clock apart to understand the intricacies, to understand how it works and why it works that way. Again, very studious, the researchers, great scientists. Sevens make great scientists. Again, that truth-seeking energy. They're not going to take something at face value or just because someone told them so. Sevens often like to sort of be alone or in solitude, and maybe not long term, but they definitely need their solitude. They need their alone time to meditate or to get back in touch with themselves, because there's so much going on within a seven, between that mystical side and that practical side, that they need a lot of check-ins, right? So they would flourish in a relationship that understands that they need their alone time, okay? Let's see. So when we look at the negative traits of the seven, we see that they become much more opinionated, sarcastic, cold, very reserved, self-righteous. They become offended easily. They become the perfectionist, and they become too practical and logical. And so they often will shut that mystical side of themselves off completely. Again, because it becomes this energy of like seeing is believing. And as we all know, the more intuitive side of yourself, the psychic side, there's not much to see there. It's all based on like internal feeling, that inner compass. And so if they are in their shadow side, they can be way too practical and logical, where they can't explain something. They can't prove something, right? It's kind of like, it's a feeling. And so they shut that other side off to themselves and lose touch with that. And that can be very challenging for a seven when, again, part of their purpose is to be that bridge between the two worlds, right? The two realms. So when we look at the energy of the Virgo, the lower expression of the Virgo, we can see how it feeds into the lower expressions of the seven and really kind of becomes this stuck energy where it becomes almost too grounded. It feeds into that more practical, logical energy of the seven, that perfectionism, and also that sort of more cold and sarcastic side of the seven with the Virgo energy of being overly critical, right? And so they can get so in their heads, so in the physical, that they become very pessimistic and a little bit too meticulous, right? Like everything has to be done perfectly, or it's not finished, right? And so it just is a stuck energy. It's an energy that keeps you sort of going in circles and not really accomplishing anything. And then you sort of couple that with like getting that tunnel vision of the seven, where you become very opinionated and cold and reserved and self-righteous, right? And you couple that with that very dense energy of the earth energy of Virgo and that lower expression, and you become overly systematic and rigid, and it's a stuck energy. It just keeps you in place and really cut off from an entire, half of yourself that you're meant to explore and embrace. So in the negative side of things, seven Virgo energy can be very challenging because of that stuck energy, because it's so dense, it's so grounded, right? It's like almost too grounded. It's like you've set so many roots that you just can't move now. So that can be very, very challenging. And you can just feel like you keep hitting a wall, that things are stuck, that your relationships are suffering, that your career is suffering, that you feel like out of alignment with purpose, whatever the case may be. Now, there's nothing wrong with the lower expressions. I say this in every reading because it's really important to understand there's nothing wrong with these lower expressions. They are a part of who you are, and they will always be a part of who you are in this lifetime. And you'll dip in and out of those lower expressions all throughout your journey. The purpose is that they are meant to show us something about ourselves, right? They're meant to teach us something help us to learn something through those challenges, through those experiences. And it's through the awareness that we understand, okay, I don't like how this makes me feel, or I don't like who I am when I'm in these lower expressions. So how do I move beyond them? And so again, and that's something you'll figure out through the challenges that you face. But it's through those challenges that you sort of are able to take out the wisdom and use that wisdom to elevate you to the higher octave, right? So again, there's nothing wrong with the lower expressions. They serve a purpose. It's just a matter of working with them and learning to manage them so that they don't take control, right? Or they don't hinder you or overly ground you in this case. Now, when we look at the higher expressions of Virgo and the 7, they're so complementary. You could almost say like 7 energy is very Virgo energy as well, because again, it's just that, both of them are very, very sensitive, very humble, kind, empathetic. I think the Virgo energy brings in that sort of more, that empathy and that sort of big heart, right? So it's like, so where the 7 could sometimes get a little bit too practical, you've got that sort of really kind and compassionate energy of Virgo coming in to bring in the human element, right? And so they work together really, really well. Both are very meticulous. When they're in their higher expression, that's a good thing. They can follow the details. If you give a 7 who's also got Virgo a job to do, they're going to make sure that it's done well because they're aware of the details. They want to know how it works. And they're going to put in the work to figure out how it works through that sort of methodical energy. And also that Virgo who's like a quick thinker, right? Like they're quick on their feet. And so that assists the 7 energy as well to be able to research and to, understand things in a way that they can use that information. So it's actually a really complementary energy. Now, in the higher expression as well, I would say it can be a very, it can also be kind of like a really grounding energy. So you just got to be careful that if you are Virgo and a 7, that you're just not, you're not becoming too grounded, right? Like, because again, 7 is meant to figure out how to work with both the mystical and the practical sides of themselves. That's when they're going to feel the best. That's when they're going to feel their most holistic. And Virgo being such a strong earth energy and practical, right? It can sort of be like a fine line. Like you just have to be careful of not, again, falling too easily into that lower expression where you become too practical and logical. And I think that's probably one of the more bigger aspects of the Virgo 7 energy, and sort of where you sort of probably will see the most challenges is when you become too practical and sort of closed off to that more mystical, intuitive side of yourself. But again, Virgos are so empathetic and they're very, tuned into themselves as well through that, and lead usually from a heart center. So they're very, very capable of that more intuitive side as well. But yeah, overall, Virgo and 7 complement each other so incredibly well. And it's kind of like the Virgo energy is the cheerleader for the 7 and vice versa. And so it just kind of compounds that energy and what you set out to sort of accomplish in this lifetime. And it can really be assist you in your relationships and how you interact with people through that more compassionate energy, right? Because again, you think of 7s when they're in their element, they're the researchers, the scientists, and so they can sometimes be sort of a little out of touch with their emotions. And so that Virgo energy sort of assists that as well. So anyway, overall, beautiful energies to work with, unless you get into those lower expressions, and then that's going to be really challenging. But you will learn a lot about yourself, and you will learn to manage those energies so that they don't keep you stuck. Okay? So I hope this was helpful. Thank you so much for listening. Take care. Libra, if you are a Libra sun, moon, or rising, and you are also a life path number 7, then this reading is for you. We are going to take a look at the higher and the lower expressions of both Libra and the 7, so you can see how these energies kind of work together, how they could potentially work against each other, so you kind of know what you signed up for this journey. Okay, so Libra is an air sign. When Libra is in its highest expression, we see the diplomat, the peacemaker, a very fair, idealistic, social, and friendly individual. They're intelligent. They like to find solutions to problems, and they often do so with ease. They can be very forgiving, very trustworthy, and tactful. They're able to read a room and know how to sort of disseminate the information so that it lands in a way that people don't become defensive, which is a great trait to have. In their lower expression of Libra, we see this like moody energy, dishonesty, indecisiveness, neediness. They become egotistical, self-indulgent, untrustworthy. They can be detached and unemotional, as well as vain and selfish. Now, when we look at the seven is an introverted energy. Okay, I would think Libra, has so much to do with relationships. It feels a little bit more extroverted, right? 7 energy is introverted. It's a very internal energy. When we look at the astrological connection, we see sort of similar to Piscean energy, or even the full moon. So 7 is considered a water element as well. 7 in its positive traits, we see a very intellectual person, someone who is highly sensitive, highly intuitive, and highly psychic. Now, 7s are meant to be the bridge between the ethereal plane and the physical plane. And so a big side of 7s is that more mysticism, right? That mystical side, the intuitive, psychic, sensitive side of themselves. But they're also very studious. They're great at details. They're very meticulous. They make phenomenal scientists and researchers. They like to know what's going on. They're the truth seekers, right? They want to know the why. They want to know the how. They're not the ones that you're going to tell them something and they're just going to blindly believe it. They need to do the research. They need to understand it. Now, when we look at the negative traits of the 7, we see they become very opinionated, very cold, withdrawn, sarcastic, self-righteous, offended easily. They become the perfectionist and they become overly practical or logical, which of course keeps them very grounded and also shuts them off to that more mystical side of themselves, right? And that's such a big part of them that they're missing out on, half of themselves, right? Now, when we look at the lower expressions of both Libra and the 7, we can see how these really feed into each other, but not in necessarily a great way. Again, that Libra energy, where in its highest expression, it's all about bringing people together, working together, collaboration, being the peacemaker, very idealistic, optimistic, right? When we get into lower expressions, we see more pessimistic, we see that self-indulgentness, we see the unemotional, sort of vain, selfish person who's dishonest, moody, indecisive, all of those things, more detached. And that feeds into the lower expression of the 7, again, who becomes very opinionated, very sarcastic, very self-righteous. And so you can see how that would be very challenging to have and maintain solid relationships with that energy. So it would affect potentially your work life, your relationships. It could affect how you trust yourself, how you trust others, how you trust the universe, right? All of those things, it can feed into that, and it can really start to isolate you from, again, that more mystical, sort of cohesive side of yourself. Same thing with like the lower Libran energy. It's very much a divisive, withdrawn, isolating energy, right? It sort of works at creating that divisiveness as opposed to working towards harmony. And again, with the 7, the issues or the problems with that is you become so opinionated and so self-righteous that you are missing out on the bigger landscape. You're missing out on, the the gems that are other people's opinions and other people's experiences and other people's ideas, right? You become closed off to that. And again, it becomes a very isolating energy. Now, with that being said, I will also say that the lower expressions are not a bad thing. They are a part of who you are, and they're a part of who you are for a reason. You are meant to experience those energies to show you something. When we're in our lower expressions, that's when we find that we are in most of our challenges, right? We see a lot of challenges surface. We hit a lot of brick walls, that things aren't moving, that things become toxic, or whatever the case may be, and we face challenges. And those challenges are meant to show us something, to teach us something. We're meant to learn something from it. We're meant to take that energy and figure out how to manage it and to utilize it to elevate us to a higher octave, right? So they're not bad, and you will fall in and out of your negative traits all throughout your lifetime. And so they're not meant to go anywhere. We're just meant to understand them, be aware of them, and learn to manage them, right? So they don't take over. Now, when we look at the higher expressions of 7 and Libra, they're very complementary, very beautiful energy. We have this Libran energy of bringing people together, of collaboration. And honestly, that is probably one of the biggest keys in the Libra energy, because for 7s, if you're that truth seeker, if you are the researcher, if you are inventing something, or you're a scientist, you're getting down to the core of things, you have to be able to collaborate. You have to be able to take other people's ideas. You may have to take other people's directives and understand them, right? And work with them. So that Libra energy really assists with that. Same thing with, again, with it being more of an extroverted energy, it kind of pulls the 7 out of its shell a little bit. I could see somebody who's got Libra energy and 7 energy being a professor, being a philosopher, being a researcher, but somebody who goes on to maybe speak about that research, right? To share that wisdom, to share that truth, right? So they're going to work really hard to get down to the bottom of things, but they're also going to be able to share that information in a way that it lands really well with other people, right? And so people don't become defensive necessarily. Again, it goes back to that tactfulness. Libras make great diplomats. And so if you need to find a way to disseminate the information, to disseminate that truth, what better way to do that than with that Libra energy? And so I do feel like that Libran energy is coming in to assist you, in how you relate to others, how you build that trust, how you, again, disseminate the information. Because remember, Libras are very intelligent and they like to find solutions to problems. 7s also like to find the truth, right? And the truth generally is a solution. So it complements each other very, very well. I would say if you have Libra energy as well as 7, you're not meant to be, living off grid in the middle of nowhere, just sitting at a computer researching or whatever. There may be an element to that, right? Of that, in your life. But I feel like you would probably be someone who needs to do the research, but then share that information. And it's through how you share it, how you relate to others, how you trust others, that is going to really have the greatest impact with that, right? And so with that Libra energy, that really assists in doing so. So it's beautiful complementary energy at the higher expression, 100%. You can see how well it works together. Now, in the lower expression, obviously, as with any sign, it's going to be challenging. It's almost like you have to work through the lower self, and give the ego a different job to do than sort of taking over your experience. Because again, the 7, even if you're a scientist and you're working with more practical, logical things, you still need to be able to bring in that more intuitive and even psychic energy as well. Because remember, you're supposed to be the bridge between the mystical and the physical. And so I feel like, again, you could be a 7 who has Libra energy, who is able to sort of release some of the taboo that's or the stereotypes that are around, being a psychic, being a reader, being, in doing something sort of more mystical. So yeah, it can be really powerful, beautiful energy to work with. And when you're in those lower expressions, yeah, it's going to be challenging, but again, it's there to show you something. So hopefully this has been helpful in sort of highlighting those energies for you, so you kind of know what you're signed up to work with in this lifetime. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate each and every one of you. Take care. Scorpio, if you are a Scorpio sun, moon, or rising, and you are also a life path number 7, then this reading is for you. We're going to take a look at the higher and the lower expressions of Scorpio and the 7 to see how these energies work together and how they could potentially work against each other, so you kind of know what you're working with. So Scorpio is a water sign. In its highest expression, we see ambition, determination, bravery, loyalty, honesty, protectiveness. Scorpios can be very protective. They're intuitive, they're psychic, they can be those independent thinkers. They're not going to be easily influenced by outside forces. They're assertive, they're emotionally deep, right? They have an emotional depth to them, even if they don't show it. So there's a lot usually going on under the surface, but they have great poker faces. So you're never going to know unless they tell you. They're deeply sensitive and they're very passionate. Now, when we look at the lower expressions of Scorpio, we see they can be stubborn, manipulative, intolerant, jealous, resentful, aggressive, vengeful, possessive. They can have a lack of trust in others and a lack of vulnerability. They can also be moody and hypersensitive. Now, when we look at the energies of the 7 is a very introverted energy. The astrological connection is closer to like Pisces or even the full moon. Now, 7 is also considered a water element. So we have the water of Scorpio and the water of the 7. And so things just got really, really deep. Now, when we look at the positive traits of the 7, we see this very intelligent energy. They're very sensitive, also very intuitive and psychic. So you couple that with the intuitiveness and the psychic energy of the Scorpio, and I would not be surprised if you have Scorpio and 7 energy that you are incredibly intuitive, very, very capable of reading other people's energy, reading the energy of a room, being psychic, a medium, something like that. They're very 7s are very studious. They are, they can be meticulous and good at details. They also make great scientists, great researchers. They are the truth seekers, right? And I would also say Scorpio can be considered a truth seeker as well, because they are that independent thinker. Neither the Scorpio nor the 7 are going to just take things at face value. They're going to hear what you have to say, and then they're going to investigate it, and they're going to figure out like how it works, why it works that way. They're going to get to the truth of the matter, right? And even if they have to do that, again, independently, they're okay with that. Now, one thing with the 7 is 7s are meant to be the sort of the bridge between the mystical realm and the physical realm, right? And so they are going to have their hands or their energy in the more ethereal as well as the physical. And what I love about the Scorpio energy is that just complements this so well, because again, Scorpio is very psychic and intuitive. They are so deep that they are sensitive, right? Sensitivity with Scorpio is just a common trait. And so they're in tune to those higher frequencies, right? To the more ethereal energy. And 7s are meant to really lean into that in their lifetime to, again, bridge the gap and create that, that bridge between the two realms. So I think that Scorpio energy really assists with that. When we look at the negative traits of 7, we see they become very opinionated. They can be cold, sarcastic, very reserved, self-righteous. They can be offended easily. They also become the perfectionist or too practical and logical. So what usually happens if you're in that lower trait is you end up sort of discounting that more mystical side of yourself. And because you can't prove it, right? You can't, it's not logical. It's not something that can be explained or proved away, right? Like you can't, it's like seeing is believing, and you get so ingrained in that again, you cut that other side of yourself off. And as a 7, that can be really challenging, right? And really detrimental to your progress, because you're meant to really embrace that more mystical side of yourself, that more intuitive psychic side. There's meant to be like this really beautiful balance between the two when it comes to 7s. With that being said, the Scorpio energy will assist you in that more mystical side as well, right? Like stepping into that. However, with that being said, when you couple the negative traits of Scorpio and the negative traits of the 7, it really becomes this aggressive, sort of opinionated, just self-righteous, potentially, manipulative, intolerant energy, because Scorpio energy at its lower expression is incredibly intense. Again, that stubbornness, like, if somebody upsets a Scorpio and they're in their lower expression, they will hold a grudge, like they will just cut you out and that's it. And the 7, if they're in their lower expression, could also fall into that, right? So it begins to affect relationships. It begins to affect stepping into your purpose. It begins to affect how you trust others. And, so much about 7s, again, because they are the truth seekers. They are the ones who are, again, meant to be that bridge. So they have to learn to trust themselves in this lifetime and trust others, and trust the universe. And so a lot of their challenges in life will have to do with relationships, right? And so if you have lower Scorpio and lower 7, your relationships are going to be a struggle. I mean, they're just going to be, because you have that very like ego-driven energy, the very lower energies of self, where again, it's very opinionated. You've got tunnel vision. You are self-righteous. You have this manipulative, intolerant energy about you, and you've become vengeful, aggressive, resentful. And that's a hard energy to be around, right? It's also a very difficult energy to be in. And so your lower expressions, if you are Scorpio, Sun, Moon, Rising, and also a 7, if you're in your lower expressions, that is not going to be an easy ride, right? That's going to be challenging, incredibly challenging. However, there's nothing wrong with those lower expressions, because they are a part of who you are. And if they're surfacing for a reason, and you're meant to learn something about yourself through that. You are meant to learn to manage those energies, work with them, use them to your advantage, that sort of thing. But you're not meant to get stuck within them. It's when you get stuck within them that you will start to see challenges surface around them to help show you where it is that you need to make some adjustments, right? So eventually you use those negative traits to assist you in elevating yourself into a higher octave. So they are meant to work with you, not against you. Although when you're in them, it can feel like they're working against you. So it's very powerful, intense, very strong energy, lower Scorpio, lower 7, when they're combined. But again, it's going to show you something about yourself and how you can channel that energy into something much more positive and something that will assist you, right? So chances are, again, if you've got Scorpio and 7 energy, you probably signed up for that, and you'll probably see a lot to do with relationships in this lifetime. And that's probably where you're going to see a lot of challenges until you learn the lessons associated with whatever that is. Because you think about Scorpio energy, Scorpio is ruled by Pluto. Pluto is death, rebirth, and transformation. You think about 7 energy, 7 in astrology is the 7th house in astrology is all about relationships. So you will probably see, if you are Scorpio and you're a 7 and you are in those lower expressions, you'll probably see a lot of death, rebirth, transformation when it comes to your relationships. But those are going to show you, remember, transformation, right? Those are going to show you something. They're going to assist you. They're there to ultimately help you to step above and beyond those lower expressions, right? You'll fall back into them throughout your lifetime, right? That's just part of who you are and what you signed up for. But again, there's always something to be learned through that. Now, with that being said, when we look at the higher octaves of Scorpio and 7, they actually work really well. Scorpio, they're both water energy, so they're both very, very deep. They both want to get to the root of the problem, whatever the situation is, to come up with the truth, to come up with the solution. Again, both being more independent thinkers, they're not going to be easily swayed or easily influenced by outside forces, which doesn't create a bias. So they're very open to other people's opinions and experiences, but they're also going to look at the situation through the lens of their own, with a open mind, right? So until they figure out the truth, they're not going to just take things at face value, which is really powerful. That's what I mean. A Scorpio 7 would make a great psychoanalyst, a great investigator, a great scientist, something like that, because they're not going to be easily biased. They're not going to be easily manipulated into choosing a side or something like that. They're going to get to the truth of the matter, and they're going to do that fairly, right? And Scorpio is such an ambitious, determined sign that it fuels that, it fuels the 7 to do that work. And then with it being so sensitive, so intuitive and psychic, both Scorpio and the 7. Again, I wouldn't be surprised if you've got Scorpio energy and you're a 7 and you're a psychic, you are a reader, you're a numerologist or astrologer, something in the mystical sciences. I would not be surprised to see that. But also if you are in the more physical, 3D realm, and you do investigative work, or again, psychoanalytical work, or a therapist or something like that, where you're getting in deep into the psyche of others and getting to the truth of the situation, right? So together, they are very powerful energies to work with, very powerful, very deep. But that's a good thing. So again, if you came here as a Scorpio 7, and again, I would say even in your higher expression, you're probably going to see a lot around relationships. But that could be you working with other people with their relationships, right? Helping them to get to the truth of the matter. Researching and collaborating with other people to find a cure for something. Who knows? But it's very, very powerful energy to work with. And it's just as powerful in those lower expressions. It can be very, very challenging. But what it will show you and what it will teach you will be just as profound, right? So intense, but beautiful. So I hope this was helpful. Thank you so much for listening. Take care. Sagittarius, if you are a Sag Sun, Moon, or Rising, and you are also a life path number 7, then this reading is for you. We're going to look at the higher and the lower expressions of both Sagittarius and the 7 to see how these energies work together, as well as they could work against each other, so that you can see what you sort of signed up for this journey. So Sagittarius is a fire element. When Sag is in its highest expression, we see the freedom lovers, the very optimistic, honest, intelligent, great sense of humor, fair-minded individual who's spontaneous and fun, adaptable, enthusiastic, and very generous and playful. It's a very fun energy. Now, when it's in its lower expression, we see impatience, sort of bluntness with no tact. So not really caring or aware of how what they say, how it lands on other people, which can, of course, create divisiveness and defensiveness. They can also have, promise more than they can deliver, right? Which then creates stress and anxiety for basically everyone involved. They can be inconsistent, they can be emotionally distant, they can be reckless within their behavior, and they tend to bore easily. They can start something and then get bored with it and have to start something new. So they may, start and end a job frequently, because again, they start it, they end it, they start it, they end it, because they have a hard time. They just get bored easily. It's a fire energy, and it's a sort of a fast moving energy. And so there's a lot that needs to be happening to keep their attention. Now, if we look at the 7 energy, we have more of sort of an introverted energy. And I would say Sag energy is much more extroverted than 7. 7 is very introverted energy. A lot is going on within. It's a water element. It's mostly associated with like Pisces or even the full moon. Now, when we look at the positive traits of the 7, we see intelligent, sensitive, very intuitive, psychic, but also studious, great researcher, would make a great scientist, very, very much the truth seeker. They want to know that, how things work, why they work that way. They're not going to take things at face value. They are going to have to research it, look into it, and understand it before they can sort of commit to it or buy into it. Now, 7s are meant to be the bridge between the mystical and the physical planes. So that's why they've got they're so in tune to that when they're in their higher expression, to that intuitive psychic side of themselves. But they're also so good at like the research, being the truth seeker and sort of more meticulous and into the finer details. So they become the bridge between the two and sort of find ways to incorporate both realms, right? Now, when we look at the negative traits of the 7, we see very opinionated, sarcastic and cold, reserved, withdrawn, self-righteous, offended easily. They become the perfectionist, or they become too practical and logical. So, and they end up shutting that mystical side of themselves off because it can't be proven, right? It's not logical. There's nothing logical about, intuitiveness or, the psychic realms. And so they end up just closing that side off of themselves and missing a big piece of the puzzle when they're in that lower expression. Now, when we look at the lower expression of Sag and the lower expression of the 7, we see the impatience, the bluntness, the emotionally distant, the reckless behavior of the inconsistent energy of Sag, coupled with that sort of sarcastic, reserved, withdrawn, perfectionist, practical, logical energy of the 7. And honestly, it just kind of creates chaos. It just kind of creates like this energy, like where the 7 is trying to be very methodical, meticulous, practical, logical. And then we have the Sag energy that just can't commit to anything. It's sort of all over the place. It's reckless. It's, emotionally distant and inconsistent. And so you have like sort of this incredible push-pull energy between 7 and lower Sag, right? Lower 7 and lower Sag. And so it just kind of becomes a situation where you just feel like Mr. Jekyll and Dr. Hyde. Is that it? Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde? Whatever. Mr. Hyde, Dr. Jekyll. I don't know. Whatever it is. But like there's two sides of you, and they are constantly in like at war with one another. So that can be a really challenging energy to work with if you're in both lower expressions of Sag and the 7. But again, when you're in those lower expressions, it's not a bad thing. It's meant to show you something. There's something there to learn about yourself, to learn about the experience, to pull wisdom from, to learn to manage those energies so that you can use them to your advantage and so that you can use them to elevate yourself to a higher octave. You won't, eradicate the energies of the lower traits, right? Those are a part of who you are. What happens is that they become so strong that they're the driving force a lot of times. And until we can recognize it, become aware of it, work with it, and then mitigate it, and then use that energy and manage it, until we can do that, they sort of take over type thing. And it can just be really, really challenging and overwhelming until we figure out how, what we're trying to be shown, or what's trying to be shown to us, what lesson is to be learned, what wisdom we can pull from it, and how we can work with it. And then once we can do that, then we're able to use that energy to elevate ourselves into the higher octave. So lower expressions are not a bad thing, but lower expression of Sag, lower expression of 7 together are going to be challenging. No doubt about it. But it's also going to show you some pretty profound things about yourself as well. Now, the higher expressions of 7 and Sag actually really work very, very beautifully together. I love sort of the sort of fun-loving, playful, generous, enthusiastic energy of Sag, sort of lightening the load a little bit for the 7, like lightening, sort of just making things a little bit lighter, bringing in some air into sort of a closed off room, right? And so it can just lighten things up a little bit. And I like that for the 7 because 7s again can be so so much is going on, behind the scenes within. And that's why they need their alone time. They need that solitude so that they can like check in with themselves, get sort of like recalibrate themselves and find their equilibrium. And then they can go back out and face the world. But I like how, like I said, the Sag energy, that fire energy sort of motivates them, brings that optimism into the room, and also that sense of humor. So again, it just lightens things up for the 7. 7s can become very serious when they are, because again, they're those truth seekers. They're the investigators. They want to find things out, but they're also like the mystics. And they have a big job to do because they're creating that bridge, right, between the realms. And so Sag energy not only like allows them and helps them to be more adaptable to their surroundings, to things going on, to whatever situations may show up, but it also, creates this energy of like fair-mindedness and spontaneity that the 7 may not naturally embrace. So I really like the lighter energy that higher elevated Sag brings to the table. And that is going to assist the 7 to, again, be a little bit more open-minded, be fair-minded when it's, doing that research, listening to ideas, listening to other people's opinions and experiences, and finding ways to incorporate that energy. And even with itself, right? I think it just lightens the load a little bit for the 7 overall. So it's very optimistic energy. So it's not, it's going to assist the 7 in being more optimistic about whatever that truth is, whatever the situation is. And it's going to help to elevate them into that more mystical side of themselves. So it's a very complementary energy when it's in its higher expression, for sure. Lower expression is where it's going to be incredibly challenging because, like I said, it just feels like you're working against yourself a lot of times, right? And that can be feel incredibly uncomfortable until you kind of figure out how to move with those energies, how to work with them, how to work with them. But the more, as you continue to do it, you'll continue to elevate yourself. And when you get to those higher octaves, again, it's just really complementary, beautiful energy of Sag and the 7. So hopefully this was helpful. Thank you so much for listening. And like I said, I just think that even though it may be challenging in the lower octaves, once you get into those higher ones, you've got that fire of Sag, you've got those depths of 7. This is powerful energy to work with, and your soul did not make a mistake in assigning those energies to you before coming here. So anyway, again, I hope this was helpful. Thank you so much for listening. Take care. Capricorn, if you are a Capricorn sun, moon, or rising, and you are also a life path number 7, then this reading is for you. We're going to take a look at the higher and the lower expressions of both Capricorn and the 7 so you can get a better understanding of what you came here to work with, how these energies work best together, how they can work against each other. So hopefully this is helpful. Capricorn is an earth energy. When Capricorn is in its highest expression, we see a very ambitious, persistent, practical, disciplined, highly sensitive, responsible individual. Capricorns are self-disciplined. They are patient, they're organized, there's a sense of wisdom about them. Again, when they're in their higher expression, they're very reliable, creative, and loyal. When Capricorn is in its lower expression, we can see a more cynical behavior, selfishness, unforgiving, perfectionist, egotistical. They can be a loner. They can be overly cautious, pessimistic, and rarely satisfied, meaning that no matter what they do or what another person does, it's just not good enough or enough, right? And so when we look at the energies of the seven energy is very introverted energy. Its astrological connection is more that of like Pisces or even the full moon. 7 is considered a water element. So we have the earth element of Capricorn and the water element of the 7. Now, the positive traits of the 7, we have very similar to Capricorn. We have that more intelligent energy, very studious, good at details, very meticulous, great at research, great scientist, would make a great scientist. They are the truth seekers. 7s are the truth seekers. They want to know why something works the way it does, how it works. They want to, seeing is sort of believing for them. You can tell them something and they're not going to take it at face value. They need to do the research. They need to look into it. They need to understand it and how it works and why it works that way. And so you can see how the higher elevation octave of Capricorn assists that 7 in those pursuits, right? That more ambitious, sort of practical, disciplined energy. So if you are a Capricorn and a 7, those positive traits are going to assist you in seeing something through to the end, being very meticulous, being dedicated, having that sort of ambition, that organization, that wisdom, and that reliability. So if you're like a scientist, and you've got, say you're a Capricorn with 7 energy, I could see you being like a scientist who comes up with a cure for cancer or something, right? Like there's just like that incredible drive and disciplined, ambitious energy behind you. And then you've got that 7 energy that's that true seeker and really wants to get down to, how something works and why it works that way and how to make something better through the truth of something, right? And so it's just this really incredible, powerful energy that fuels the 7 in those more intellectual, sort of logical approaches. Now, the 7, however, is meant to be the bridge between the mystical and the physical. They are also, not only are they like very practical, logical, those things, they are also very sensitive, intuitive, and psychic. And so they are meant to, have their head in the clouds, be into that ethereal plane as much as they are in the physical plane. And what's interesting is Capricorn is also very highly sensitive. It's often seen as more, obviously very practical. It's, driven and all those more physical things. But it's also, it's also got that sort of water element to it, that deeper element to it. If you ever see the Zodiac, the symbol for Capricorn, it's the goat, but it's got the tail of a fish, right? So it's like got that deeper side to itself. And it can also be intuitive and, again, highly sensitive. And so the Capricorn energy in its higher octave really assists the 7 in a lot of ways. It gives it that drive. It like assists it in its more practical pursuits, but also not deterring it from its more mystical pursuits, right? Like it's like the more ethereal energy. And so you could also be somebody who's a Capricorn 7 and you are a psychic or a medium or a reader or, a yoga instructor who is taking, yoga, the practice of yoga, which is more mystical, right? And putting it to practical use, as in like actually physically doing the moves in the process, right? So you would be a great person to sort of execute that in the physical, right? And so Capricorn energy in its higher expression and the 7 energy in its highest expression really fuels each other, really works well together and complements each other's, again, more positive traits and brings out sort of the best in both signs. So it's very, very complementary energy to work with if you are a Capricorn, Sun, Moon, Rising, and also a 7. Now, where things get a little bit challenging, as with any sign, is when we get into those lower expressions. So again, remember, Capricorn is more cynical, selfish, unforgiving, the perfectionist, egotistical in its lower expression, and pessimistic, right? 7 in its lower expression likes to, be opinionated, is cold and sarcastic, very reserved, very withdrawn, self-righteous, and again, too practical or logical, and can be the perfectionist. And so again, it can close off that more mystical side to itself and basically lose a whole part of itself, right? It becomes fragmented at that point. And the Capricorn Earth energy, it's interesting because the 7 negative traits that are most sort of profound are the ones that are very earthy, very grounded, almost too grounded, right? Very practical, logical, all those things, self-righteous, opinionated. And so then you couple that with a lower expression of Capricorn, which is very grounded, very dense energy. It becomes like stepping into a barrel full of cement and just sitting there, right? Like you're not going to move anywhere. It becomes very restrictive. It really affects relationships. It affects your work. It affects, it affects your ability to expand, to explore, to do all those things you would need to do to find the truth to something, right? To be open to experiences, other people's ideas, opinions, that sort of thing. If you're in your lower Capricorn, you become overly cautious and pessimistic. And then you're in your lower 7 and you become withdrawn and cold and self-righteous. And so you can see how that would affect relationships, how that would affect your life experiences, and how that could cause the 7 to become incredibly isolated and withdrawn, and too practical or logical, and too much of a perfectionist. And so again, it's just a stuck energy. It just keeps you sort of no movement, no forward growth, movement. Everything just kind of comes to a halt. So you can see how that can be incredibly challenging. And so where the higher elevated traits work really, really well together, the lower expressions of Capricorn and 7 can be incredibly challenging for the 7. And for the, obviously the Capricorn is one and the same, but it can be very challenging. Now, I will say those lower expressions, I say this in every reading, they're not a bad thing. They're a part of who you are. They're just meant to be acknowledged, worked through, and managed, right? You're supposed to use those lower expressions to help elevate you to the higher octaves. It's in those lower expressions that you're going to kind of feel your worst, right? You're going to face those challenges. Those challenges are going to show you what it is you're meant to learn. You just need to move through them. And it's through moving through them and being persistent and understanding that side of yourself better, right? Working through those shadows, that's going to help elevate you into the higher expression. And when you're in that higher expression, as we talked about, because it's so complementary as well, it's going to feel good. It's going to feel like you're in purpose. It's going to feel like you are accomplishing what your soul set out to accomplish in this lifetime. So it's going to feel really, really good. But you can't get there without going through sort of the lower, more denser energy and transmuting that energy into something much more elevated. So again, lower expressions are not bad things. They're a part of you. You'll have them for the rest of your life. You're meant to move in and out of them throughout your lifetime, but you will learn how to manage them. You will learn how to work with them as opposed to them sort of controlling or dictating the situation. And so again, it's actually beneficial and a good thing. So I hope this was helpful in sort of highlighting those higher and lower expressions so you can recognize them, sort of figure out how to work with them, and figure out maybe why your soul signed up for Capricorn and 7 energy. That's always a fun thing to pay attention to as you move through your journey, right? Like you might not figure it out right away, but you'll start to see like, oh, okay, this would make sense. So I would have chose Capricorn and 7. This is what my soul is looking for. This is what I'm meant to do, or whatever the case may be, right? And that's part of the journey, but it makes it a little bit more fun to understand those higher and lower expressions and what we have to work with. So again, hopefully this is helpful. Thank you so much for listening. Take care. Aquarius. If you are Aquarius, Sun, Moon, or Rising, and you are also life path number 7, then this reading is for you. So we're going to look at the higher and the lower expressions of Aquarius and 7 so that you can kind of get an idea of how these energies work together and how they may work against each other. So Aquarius is an air sign. When we see Aquarius in its highest expression, we see someone who's very adaptable to change, someone who's maybe more esoteric, someone who's smart, creative, friendly, independent in their thinking and their actions, free-spirited, unconventional, honest, devoted, someone who's got a very positive outlook, who's optimistic, who's passionate about what they're doing, who's reliable, mysterious, and the freedom seeker. Now, when we look at the lower expression of Aquarius, we see the short attention span, lack of focus, lack of empathy, unpredictability. They become stubborn, they can be extremists, they become maybe aloof, pessimistic, and overly rebellious, as well as impatient. So when we look at 7 energy is a very introverted energy. The astrological connection for 7 is more Pisces energy, as well as the full moon energy, right? So the energy of the full moon sort of is in correlation to the 7 energy. 7 energy is considered a water element. So we have the air element of Aquarius and the water element of the 7. 7, when we look at the positive traits, we see someone who's very intelligent, who's typically very studious, great at details, meticulous, a great researcher. They are someone who is going to be the truth seeker. 7s are the truth seekers. They want to know how something works, why it works that way. They're not going to take something at face value. They need to understand it before they can claim it to be the truth, right? And that really plays in well with the Aquarius higher octave because, again, Aquarius is very unconventional. It's very free-spirited and independent in the way that it thinks, in the way that it moves through the world. And so that assists the 7 energy in that seeking the truth, right? They're not going to be easily influenced by outside structures, right? The way that the world works, quote unquote, or the way that we've been conditioned to believe that things work. 7s are going to want to get down to the nitty gritty of it. They want to understand, and that Aquarian energy is going to fully assist that 7 in that process. Now, another way that Aquarius energy is so beneficial to the 7 is because 7s are meant to be the bridge between the ethereal and the physical plane. They're meant to be dabbling in mysticism. They're meant to be dabbling in spirituality, religion, whatever. Something that is more mystical in nature. Now, they are also very sensitive and intuitive and psychic. They can be psychic as well, right? They're very in tune. It's, again, a water element. There's a lot going on under the surface. So what's beautiful about 7 is they are meant to be that bridge between the mystical and the physical. And so they're meant to embrace their more logical, practical, masculine energy, as well as that more feminine, mystical, intuitive side as well. They're meant to embrace both sides and find their harmonious balance. And where Aquarius really comes in really well with that is because, again, Aquarians are, the freedom seekers. They're very mysterious. They like that more mystical thing. They can be esoteric. They again are creative. They're the free-spirited, unconventional thinkers, and in how they live and how they move through their experiences. And so that kind of gives some more fluidity to the experience for the 7, right? It gives them permission to not be so practical, to sort of explore and embrace that more, mystical side to themselves. So you can see how the higher elevation of Aquarius just assists the 7 all around. It's a very complementary energy, absolutely. And it also would give, Aquarians are very, again, friendly. They're sort of more outgoing. They enjoy to be a part of something that, where there's a common interest, right? And maybe that's unconventional, but that there's some kind of common interest and that they feel passionate about. And so it would also assist the more introverted energy of the 7 to sort of step outside its comfort zone, to explore, to sort of, again, not become too withdrawn or too secluded, because 7s really do need that solitude. They need that alone time to recharge, to check in with themselves, because there's so much happening within, right? So the Aquarian energy just assists them in not getting too reclusive. Now, when we look at the lower expressions of Aquarius and the lower expressions of the 7, we can see how this can be a little bit challenging. So 7 energy, when it's in its lower expression, they can be very opinionated. They can be cold, sarcastic, reserved, withdrawn, self-righteous, easily offended, too much of a perfectionist, and too practical or logical. And so again, they become almost like very like stoic and grounded, like dense almost, right? And where they become, again, sort of egocentric in that it's their way or the highway type thing. And they become very closed off to other people's ideas, other ways of thinking, that sort of thing. And it can be very sort of stuck energy. Now, the lower expression, again, of Aquarius, we've got short attention span, lack of focus, lack of empathy, unpredictability, and again, that overly rebellious, extremist energy. And they can also be very stubborn. So those two energies sort of feeding into each other, the Aquarian and the 7 energy, you kind of got this more like chaotic, no attention span, sort of stubborn energy of the Aquarius. And then the like very opinionated, sarcastic, self-righteous, overly grounded, practical, logical energy of the 7. And so again, it just creates a little bit of chaos within the situation. You've got that air energy, which again is the mind, but it's the unconventional mind of Aquarius, and it's very stubborn, with that more grounded, kind of deeper energy of the 7. And it just becomes stuck energy. It becomes chaotic, stuck energy, where it's like you've got the short attention span, but you're also trying to be very practical and logical and stick to your ideas and your opinions. But then you've got that Aquarian energy that's making you feel really flighty and aloof and all those things, and overly rebellious. And they just feed into each other, but they're like such kind of polarizing energies that, again, it feels like you're working against each other. It feels like two parts of yourself are trying to work together, but are just butting heads. And so that can just feel chaotic and disorienting in a way. And of course, it can like affect your relationships and how you show up in the world. So it can be very, very challenging. But again, as I say in every reading, those lower expressions are not bad things. They are meant to show you something about yourself. They are a part of who you are, and they will continue to be a part of who you are while you are in this vessel, right? While you go through this journey. And so we're meant to learn whatever we can learn from them and experience whatever we can experience through those lower expressions to teach us something. So we are meant to use that energy to help us to elevate into a higher octave. And once we move into that higher octave, then you are in sort of the beautiful fluid energy of the Aquarian and 7 energies that work so well together. So you're going to feel more like you're on purpose. You're going to feel like things are flowing. You're going to feel like things are working for you as opposed to against you. So just be aware when you fall into those lower expressions. Understand it's not a bad thing, but it can definitely affect your experience in a bad way, right? Or in a more negative way. But those experiences are meant to show you something. So just pay attention to that. And you will eventually learn what you need to learn, and then move into those higher octaves, and then you will start to really step into purpose and show up to that each and every day. So hopefully this was kind of helpful to, again, just kind of highlight some of those higher and lower expressions and how they might show up for you and kind of what that may feel like, so that when you're moving through it, you are more aware and can, again, just sort of learn to manage those lower expressions. You can't eradicate them, but learn to manage them so that they work for you. So I hope this was helpful. Thank you so much for listening. Take care, everyone. Pisces, if you are a Pisces sun, moon, or rising, and you are also a life path number 7, then this reading is for you. We're going to take a look at the higher and the lower expressions of Pisces and the 7 to see how these energies could work together and how they may potentially work against each other. So you know what you kind of signed up for this journey of life. So Pisces is a water sign. In its highest expression, we see someone who is highly adaptable, who's a visionary, who's kind and gentle, who's highly intuitive and psychic, very creative, empathetic, generous, emotionally mature, laid back, and overall very agreeable. In Pisces' lower expression, we see they become overly emotional, they can be hypersensitive, overly trusting, and easily swayed or influenced. They can be closed off emotionally, naive, they can have a victim mentality or be very moody. Now, when we look at seven energy is a very introverted energy. It is also a water sign, and when we look at the astrological connection, we see that it has a lot of similarities to Pisces as well as the full moon. So you're going to see a lot of similarities with the higher and the lower expressions of the seven, which is a good thing, but can also be challenging. So seven's highest, more positive traits are, again, they're very intelligent, they're very sensitive, also highly intuitive and psychic. They are, they're good at the sort of details of things. They can be meticulous. They can be studious. They can be a great researcher. They are the truth seekers. Sevens are the ones who want to know the truth of the matter. They're going to, you can tell them something, but they're going to want to do the research themselves. They're going to want to see and understand the how and the why. It has to make sense for them in some way, right? And so they're going to, again, do the research. That's why they make such great researchers or scientists or psychoanalysts, because they're going to go deep into whatever the situation is, whatever the idea is, whatever it is, to find the truth. So sevens are meant to be the bridge between the ethereal and the physical plane. And so that's why you see this like sort of mixture of mysticism, more spirituality, more like intuitiveness with more practicality, right? The research, the logical, the again, the more physical energy, because they're meant to embrace both sides of themselves to become that bridge, right? And so where Pisces is also very, they're the visionaries, they are highly adaptable, but really, and they're creative, right? Pisces are very creative, which is also very physical, but Pisces is very, very intuitive and psychic. And so they really are that deep sort of energy where they're going to lean more towards, I think, probably the mystical side of things. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be psychic or whatever, but they're going to be more in the sort of like the feeling side of things, right? The more sort of feminine energy when they're in their higher expression. Sevens are going to be a very beautiful balance between the more physical and the mystical. So it just creates this interesting dynamic. So when we look at the negative traits of seven, we see they become almost very like more dense energy. They become more opinionated, cold, sarcastic. They can be very reserved. They can be untrustworthy. They can, or where they don't trust others or themselves, right? Or the universe. They can be self-righteous. They can be easily offended. They become the perfectionist, and they become too practical or logical. If you're in your lower expression seven, it's very possible that you completely, excuse away or discount the more mystical side of yourself because you can't really prove it. It's not something that's very tangible. It's more ambiguous. And so when you're in your lower expression seven, you have a very difficult time embracing that mystical side of yourself. Now, I will say, if you have Pisces as sun, moon, or rising, and you're also a seven, you may actually find that you fall more to the other extreme, where you are not too practical or too logical, but you are so into the more ethereal and sort of that sort of deeper energy, where it comes to like the more like into the mysticism, that you sort of discount the more practical side of yourself, right? So with these water signs, like Pisces and Cancer especially, we really see, in Scorpio too, but more so like Pisces and Cancer, you could see as a 7, you falling more into the overly mystical, where you just can't ground yourself, right? You're so in the cloud, you're so in the spiritual, you're so in, that realm that you have a hard time grounding. And so that's also challenging because you are meant to be the bridge. You're meant to embrace both sides of yourself. But I could see that being a challenge for Pisces with 7 energy, because Pisces is also such a deep sign, right? That water sign, and that highly intuitive and psychic energy, and that creative, again, very divine feminine energies. And so you could be so in those divine feminine energies that you lose the more masculine energies of yourself. And so it can be more challenging to balance that, right? To find that balance. So where traditionally in the lower octaves, we see like that more practical, logical energy, I feel like with Pisces and 7, you could be more prone to, again, being in that more like divine, like more wounded feminine, right? Or divine feminine energy, even if you're in your higher octave. But just where you're losing sight of that more practical, and you have a hard time being within your body, right? And 7s are definitely meant to be in their body. They're meant to be that bridge. So I hope that makes sense. But yeah, when we look at the lower expression of Cancer, again, overly emotional, hypersensitive, overly trusting, easily swayed or influenced. One key to the 7, again, when they're in their higher octave, they want to be the truth seeker. They have to think independently. They can't be influenced by outside sources, because then they become biased. And they are the ones who need to have the open mind and have the expansiveness of thought to be able to dig deeper, to be able to see what's really going on behind the surface, or beyond the illusion, right? And so I could definitely see someone who has Pisces or 7 being a psychic, being a reader, being like a psychoanalyst, being a therapist, right? Someone who's going to dig deeper and who's not going to form a bias. So again, if you're in your lower Pisces and you're easily swayed or influenced, that can affect your higher octave of 7. And you can become where you become too rigid in your thinking, you become too overly opinionated or self-righteous, and you lose that openness, that open-mindedness, which is so critical for the 7. So that can be very challenging. You can be too heavily in your emotions. You think two water signs just in their lower octaves just becomes very overwhelming, right? It can be like a drowning effect, right? Like you're just everything that you're meant to step into is just being drowned out because you're too in your emotions, right? You're in that wounded feminine. But also I would say like the 7, some of the lower negative traits of the 7 are very wounded masculine energy, right? Like too practical, too logical, too much of a perfectionist, too overly opinionated, and self-righteous and all those things. And so it can kind of be like this push and pull, and this energy like hitting heads, right? Like just clashing. So it can be difficult energy to work with when you're in your lower expression. And especially if you are being easily influenced, that's something that will be will knock a 7 off course, because again, they're just meant to be open and seeing the bigger picture, being the observer, not necessarily, like I said, not taking things at face value, but really digging deeper and investigating. So again, if you're in your lower expression of any of the signs, it's not a bad thing. It's a part of who you are. It's part of your makeup. You're going to experience it throughout your lifetime. You're going to fall in and out of it, but it's going to show you something about yourself. It's going to show you oh, this doesn't feel good. I don't feel good when I'm doing whatever this is. I feel like I'm missing a part of myself, or whatever the case may be. And when we're in our lower expressions, that's when we're going to face our greatest challenges. And those challenges are going to try to teach us something. So it's up to us to be able to pull that wisdom from those challenges, to be able to understand the energy that we're working with and figure out a way to manage it, right? And then use those lower octaves to help lift you into the higher octaves, right? And then when you fall into those lower octaves, you become more aware of it, and then you gain the resources and the tools to be able to help assist yourself out of it, back into those higher octaves. So again, Pisces and 7 obviously work very beautifully together when they're in their higher octaves because they're so similar in their expressions and in their higher, their higher traits. Obviously, it becomes very challenging when they're in those lower expressions. But if you came here with Pisces energy and 7 energy, I would say, you're really meant to be doing something or stepping into something that's highly mystical, and you're meant to bring that more ethereal energy into the physical plane. So you could see someone who's like Pisces and a 7, again, maybe being like who's psychic, and maybe you open a business and you put that into more tangible form, right? Like you maybe become a coach or something like that, where you're using your psychic gifts to coach people in a very tangible way to come up with very tangible results. You see what I'm saying? So you're bringing the more mystical into the practical. And I would think if you have like Pisces energy or creativity, right? Same thing. It's like you're bringing these big creative ideas into the physical plane and creating something very tangible with it. Yeah, I could definitely see that if you're Pisces with that 7, because Pisces, like I said, is so intuitive and psychic and creative, as well as, obviously empathetic and all those things as well, and emotionally mature and all those things. And so it really assists the 7 in that process. But then you also have that 7 who, again, is just that great researcher. So very complementary energy in its highest expression, very complementary, because they're so similar as well. So they just the energy just compounds. But when you're in those lower expressions, that's where you're going to have your challenges, but that's the same with every sign, so in every number. So yeah, I hope this was helpful in highlighting those energies for you so that you can better work with them as you move through your journey. Thank you so much for listening. Take care, everyone. Bye for now.